Night doesn't fall here. It seeps. It slides down the crumbling rooftops and into the twisted alleys like oil, thick and unforgiving. By the time the sun has vanished behind the cathedral spires, the streets already reek of smoke, piss, and whatever's been rotting in the butcher's gutter since Wednesday. This is not a peaceful night. It never is. It's the 14th century. Could be Paris, London, or Ghent. Doesn't matter. The darkness smells the same everywhere. A pungent stew of chamber pot fumes, tallow smoke, mildew, rat fur, and spiritual despair. There's no moonlight here. The sky's veiled in soot and low prayers. And yet, beneath this blanket of rot and shadow, the city moves, groans, coughs, grinds its teeth. Because while the nobles sleep behind heavy doors and the merchants snore over their ledgers, someone, many someones, are working. Welcome to the medieval night shift. You may think cities back then went quiet after sundown. That life paused. That's a fantasy. In truth, the city becomes more honest at night. The pretense of civilization melts away. What's left is machinery, crude, grunting, blood-slick machinery powered by those the daylight prefers not to see. The medieval city was a paradox, crowded but dark, busy but terrified of movement after dusk. There were curfews, gates were locked, strangers met with suspicion, and anyone still roaming after the bells tolled was assumed to be either a criminal, a corpse, or worse, a worker. Because the dirty truth of medieval urban life is that someone had to clean the gutters, someone had to scrape up the dead dogs, douse the fires, fetch the water, empty the piss buckets, carry the fresh bread, and, quite literally, shovel the shit. Not in the morning, not at noon, at night, always at night. These were the invisible gears of the city, the gong farmers, corpse haulers, rat catchers, soot sweepers, candle boys, and silent surgeons. They didn't get songs or saints, they barely got paid. They were allowed to exist, nothing more. Their work was too foul for daylight, too loud for church hours, too shameful for polite company. But without them, the city would have collapsed in filth, rot, and flaming sewage within a week. Let's be clear, this wasn't some noble proletariat. These were not romanticized Dickensian urchins or sturdy peasants with calloused hands and kind hearts. These were often the outcast, the desperate, the cursed, people with no other option. Born into shit, scraping by with shit, often dying in shit. But here's the part most people forget. They kept everything running. While you slept, safe in your lice-riddled straw mattress, praying not to die before dawn, a stranger was knee-deep in refuse, preventing the street outside your window from becoming an open sewer. While you dreamed of saints and salvation, someone else was dragging a bloated body from the alley before it infected half the block. While the monks chanted about heaven, a boy with no shoes was lighting torches so the baker could knead dough by candlelight, and none of them were supposed to be seen. The medieval night was not poetic, it was practical, a time of labor, filth, danger, and silence. Silence enforced by law, by fear, and by necessity. Sound drew attention. Attention got you arrested, or stabbed, or both. The best night workers were like ghosts, quick, quiet, and easy to forget. If they did their job well, you never even knew they'd been there. That stain on the cobbles, gone by dawn. That pile of bones, hauled away before cockcrow. That barrel of night soil threatening to explode. Emptied by hands you'd never shake. The night shift wasn't just a job. It was a sentence, sometimes literal, as criminals were often assigned to the most revolting tasks. But it was also a strange kind of salvation. You worked in the dark so that others wouldn't have to face the truth of the city by day. It was thankless, dangerous, soul-meltingly disgusting. And it kept everyone else's illusion of order intact. So next time you complain about a late-night email or a 3 a.m. delivery slot, remember this. There was a time when the only thing standing between you and a flood of medieval feces was a man with a bucket, a rope, and no nose left to smell what he was shoveling. You think your job stinks? Try being ankle-deep in liquefied feces before the sun even thinks of rising. Meet the gong farmer. Medieval slang for the poor soul whose job was to empty human waste from cesspits, privies, and latrines. Not metaphorically, literally, with a shovel, and usually at night. Because when your profession involves hauling centuries of unflushed regret out of holes in the earth, it's best done when no one can see or smell you. Picture it. Midnight in a city of 20,000 people with exactly zero modern plumbing. That's 20,000 bladders, 20,000 bowels, and 20,000 opportunities to experience digestive disaster, all pouring into wooden boxes, stone trenches, and holes in the floor. Sometimes it just collected in basements or under your bed. Now imagine someone has to clean that up. That someone is the gong farmer. They worked under cover of darkness, not for drama, but for dignity, or what little remained of it. Their tools were simple: wooden buckets, a short-handled shovel, a strong back, and a complete absence of a gag reflex. They'd climb down into cesspits, some as deep as 12 feet, and start digging. The texture, thick. The smell, weaponized. The sounds, unmentionable. Some wore leather masks soaked in vinegar. Others simply prayed that their nostrils would stop working before their knees gave out. They were often hired by the city, paid per load, removed. A good night meant dozens of buckets hauled up and carted out beyond the city walls, to be dumped in designated pits, fields, or, when officials weren't watching, into the nearest river. Yes, that river, the one people drank from. The irony was ripe. The very people responsible for keeping the city livable were themselves untouchables. Gong farmers were shunned, forbidden from entering taverns, churches, or public baths. Children threw stones. Priests held their noses. Even plague victims got more compassion. There are recorded cases of gong farmers dying on the job, literally drowning in human waste. One poor soul in 1326 fell into a pit in London and was never seen again. Another, in Norwich, was found weeks later, half dissolved and eerily preserved by the contents of his workplace. And yet, the work continued, because it had to. Cities, after all, do not pause for shame. The job was often hereditary, passed from father to son like a cursed heirloom. Families became known for it. Nicknames stuck. Dung Jack, Bucket Tom, the Night Digger. Some leaned into it, embracing the infamy like a badge. Most simply endured, hoping no one would recognize them in daylight. And despite the horror, there were perks. Gong farmers earned more than many craftsmen. It was dangerous work, after all, and smelly, and legally unclean. So they were paid accordingly, not richly, but better. Sometimes with money, sometimes with food, sometimes with grudging respect. You want your street to smell slightly less like Satan's armpit? Pay the man in the shit-covered tunic. But no matter how much they earned, they remained ghosts in the social order. Necessary, but invisible. Spoken of in hushed tones. Referred to indirectly, like bad weather or syphilis. And yet, without them, everything collapsed. Without gong farmers, the streets backed up, the cesspits overflowed, disease spread faster, bread rotted, babies died, rats multiplied. Civilization, such as it was, dissolved into a bubbling swamp of dysentery. So while the nobles dined and the priests preached, a man with a rope and a bucket was saving the city, one steaming load at a time. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't expect a statue. He just hoped the rope didn't snap. And maybe, just maybe, that his son would choose a different path. The city clock coughs past midnight, though you hardly need a bell to mark the hour. You feel it settle across the rooftops like damp wool, heavy, scratchy, and just a little bit moldy. A stray dog whines somewhere behind the tanner's yard. A drunk hiccups theology into a puddle. Then a sudden clack, clack, clack splits the air. Dry wood against night, equal parts warning and apology. That rasping rattle is your reminder that someone, theoretically, is in charge of the darkness. He shuffles into view, wearing a cloak that smells of rain, pipe ash, and a dozen evenings spent asleep on tavern benches. One fist grips a dented lantern, whose stub of flame turns every alley into a shadow puppet nightmare. The other spins the rattle that passes for a medieval siren. They call him the Watchman, but titles are generous this century. Recruitment standards run from crippled veterans to apprentices nobody wanted, and the only training required is demonstrating you can make noise without dropping the lantern. If he's lucky, a cudgel of scarred oak hangs at his belt. If he's unlucky, that cudgel belongs to the man currently following him for reasons best left unspoken. Curfew rang hours ago, so the streets should, by law, be empty. Yet laws and hunger rarely agree on bedtime. The watchman's real brief is deterrence. Fill the silence with enough rough music that would-be burglars pick easier prey. Hear boots scuffing the cobbles? Rattle. See a shutter bang loose in the wind? Rattle harder. Two lovers sneaking home after illicit wine? Rattle like Judgment Day and shout, "Stand! Who goes?" while pretending not to smell their breath. Some nights the tactic works. Other nights the rattle only alerts thieves that the nearest authority is an asthmatic grandfather with a limp. Town records read like tragicomedy. York's Burgess roll of 1342 complains the watch is full drunken and fast asleep in the alehouse, leaving the streets to devils and cut purses. Bruges fined its patrol for helping robbers carry stolen cloth, mistaking them for diligent weavers on overtime. Paris managed the opposite extreme. 4 watchmen hanged for accepting bribes to ignore burglary in progress. Performance reviews in the 14th century could end with a noose instead of a memo. Yet the post remained stubbornly understaffed. Why keep such men? Because they are cheaper than torchlit streets, and the simple dread of being rattled awake keeps honest folk behind locked doors. Tonight, the argument between fear and incompetence plays out beside the fishmonger's stall. The watchman spots a silhouette, wheezes into pursuit, and waves his lantern like a failing starfish. If he catches the runner, justice is a swift club to the ribs, rope at dawn, and a brief appearance in the stocks for public entertainment. Evidence is his own bruised ego. Paperwork is a scrap of parchment nailed to the Guildhall door, probably damp before the ink dries. Should the runner vanish into the warren of alleys, the watchman files the incident in the mental drawer marked "Not my fault," spins the rattle louder, and limps on. Citizens finance this audible safety net through levies tacked onto ale, bread, and market stall rent. Grumble too loudly, and the council may nominate you to walk the next shift, an invitation that stills tongues faster than church bells. Meanwhile, respectable merchants hire private door wardens who lounge inside gated courtyards with proper halberds and better wages. When the public watchman passes, he tips his cap. The warden, polishing his helmet, pretends not to notice. 2 classes patrol the same moonlit stones, divided by coin and consequence. From your attic window, the scene is never heroic. An old man swings his lantern in widening circles. Behind him, a skinny apprentice hauls a spear twice his height, its iron head wobbling like an anxious weathercock. A stray dog pads along, hoping spilled grease counts as payment. Yet this shabby procession is the thin, clammy line between order and anarchy. Without it, every alley becomes an ambush, and every door a dare. With it, criminals must at least jog a little faster, risk a little more noise, and pray the watchman's cough doesn't spoil their surprise. By first light, the streets are, miraculously, still standing. Tavern shutters remain unbroken, market awnings unburnt. The watchman trudges home with eyes red as sunrise and lungs rattling harder than his wooden alarm. He will sleep through morning mass, through gossip and gratitude alike. The city will forget him until dusk drips back down the gutters, and someone must once again clatter wood against terror. So the next time a siren wails in your neat 21st century neighborhood, spare a blink of empathy for his ancestor, half sober, half terrified, wholly underpaid, clacking 3 splinters of oak through a world that believed monsters were not metaphors but locals, and usually right behind you. You smell him before you see him. Not the corpse. He's still leaking quietly in the alley, but the man who's come to collect it. He carries an odor like wet rope boiled in tallow, a mixture of grave dirt, cheap wine, and the kind of sweat that never quite washes out. A short hook dangles from his belt, chipped where too many jaws have snapped mid-lift. The lantern in his fist is shuttered, more to spare the living the sight than to guide his own steps. He already knows this route by heart. Butcher's yard, apothecary door, cathedral steps, plague cart outside the eastern gate. Tonight makes the third run. He works fast, partly from practice, partly because the last thing you want is daylight catching you hauling sin on wheels. The corpse is bloated, stiff, still wearing the gilt-colored hose of a merchant's clerk. A whisper of lice scurries beneath the collar. With one grunt and a prayer muttered so low even God pretends not to hear, the hauler hooks the body beneath the ribs, swings it onto the cart, and covers it with a sack that used to hold grain. The clerk was worth coins yesterday. Tonight he's payment in bread, watered wine, and the chance to paw through pockets nobody will miss. Pause a moment and you'll see the ritual. 2 fingers trace a cross in the air. Rapid, sloppy, insurance more than devotion. Then those same fingers tug at a ring that won't budge from the swollen knuckle. The hauler shrugs. The pit fire outside the walls doesn't care about jewelry anyway. Gold teeth, though? Different story. He'll fish those out later with the point of a knife, drop them into a pouch already clinking like tiny bells. Contradiction isn't a sin when it's your supper. City law says corpses must be removed forthwith, lest miasma bloom and children drop like flies. City purse, however, is less enthusiastic, so payment arrives in the form of stale loaves, leftover wine, and permission to scavenge. Some nights the hauler makes more pawning buttons than the aldermen spend on candles for mass. Still, the job is a curse, whispered father to son. Once you've spent a season elbows deep in mortality, no guild will have you, no inn will lend you a blanket. People cross themselves when you pass, then cross the street for good measure. Listen, wheels creak, iron rims biting cobble. That sound is mercy grinding toward the churchyard. On market mornings you taste it in the bread, a hint of wood smoke seasoned with yesterday's cremation. The lucky dead go into shallow pits sprinkled with quicklime where soil is thin and prayers thinner. The rest ride out to the bone fields beyond the walls, stacked like firewood till Sunday. Somewhere in Paris they call this strip of land le gibet des innocents, but innocence runs out when the wind shifts east and delivers its sermon through your shutters. Fear paints the route. Lamps flicker behind shutters as the cart passes. Mothers murmur talismans. Fathers bar the doors, pretending the dead man never bought parchment from their stall that very afternoon. The hauler hums, a tune that might be a lullaby, might be a tavern dirge. Hard to tell when half the lyrics have rotted away with their singers. Humming keeps the dread from filling his mouth. It also masks the occasional crack of bone when a wheel hits a rut. Not every body is nameless. Sometimes a family follows, keeping what passes for vigil. 3 steps behind the cart, faces hidden in scarves, eyes shimmering like candle ends. They carry nothing, no flowers, no coins, only silence thick enough to choke angels. The hauler nods but doesn't slow. Grief is their luxury. Speed is his responsibility. For every corpse he lingers over, 2 more slip from life to gutter, and the alderman dock his ration if dawn reveals even one stiff shadow left uncollected. Stories circle tavern tables about men who lost count. Cart tipped, limbs scattered, dogs dragging ribs under fish stalls. One tale claims a hauler in Bruges found himself joined mid-route by the corpse he'd just loaded. Foul miracle of plague gas and rigor releasing at once. They say he kept pushing, too numb to scream, till the thing toppled out on its own a street later. Whether true or ale-born, the moral sticks. Death has no manners, even for those on payroll. Yet without these midnight undertakers, the city would choke on its own cadavers. Markets would shut, churches overflow, Bakers knead bread with flies in every fold. The hauler knows this. He also knows no one will thank him. At best, a priest will whisper a truncated absolution over the trench and drop in a splinter of holy wood. At worst, town guards will accuse him of theft because fresh graves hide secrets as well as treasure chests. By the time first light brushes the spires, the cart is empty, wood smeared with a memory of blood and waxy skin. The hauler wipes his hook on straw, sips the last inch of wine, and wonders if the clerk's ring might loosen once the flesh cools. He'll try again at dusk. Until then, he sleeps wherever dawn can't find his smell. Abandoned stables, river barges, the lee side of the leper's chapel, places already accustomed to the company of rot. And you? You wake and grumble that the street still stinks of night, never knowing how much worse it was 3 hours earlier. You complain the bread tastes smoky, unaware it dried in ovens still warm from the body's final blaze. You cross yourself at the plague shrine, then cross paths with a man whose eyes show you every future you pretend not to fear. He nods, adjusts the hook at his belt, and disappears down an alley that hasn't decided yet whether to feed him another client or let him rest till sundown. That's the quiet bargain of a medieval dawn. Comfort bought with someone else's nightmare, gratitude whispered to a sky too bright to remember the dead, and a corpse hauler counting coins reclaimed from the mouths of yesterday's dreams. You wake to birdsong, if what passes for birdsong in a medieval city isn't just gulls fighting over fish guts. Somewhere a baker bangs trays, the bells of prime complain, and chamber pots tilt from upstairs windows in a yellow-brown rain. You wrinkle your nose, mutter a curse, and shuffle off to start another respectable day. Beneath your boots, however, an entirely different economy is already churning, a trade as old as the privy and twice as foul. The city's waste has value, and men without morals or sense of smell intend to cash in. They call them soil men, moon scrapers, or simply thieves, though no one in authority ever seems eager to catch them. Their work begins when decent folks snore and honest gong farmers clank home dreaming of vinegar baths. That's when two silhouettes slip from shadows, empty cart rattling like loose teeth on cobble. They follow the stink the way bees track flowers, turning corners by aroma alone, heads cocked as if listening for a choir only they can hear, the muffled drip of filth through floorboards, the echo of a brimming cesspit sighing against its wooden slats. Tonight's target squats behind a goldsmith's shop, a 3-cubicle privy built for dignity, if not discretion. The thieves test the latch, laugh at the lock, a single peg of rotten oak, and ease open a panel in the rear where the pit glistens, thick and black, under a crust of pale mold. One man drops a rope ladder, the other ties a scarf around his face, more ritual than protection. Down he goes, boots disappearing into living syrup. The stench pummels up the shaft like a curse, but he's already knee-deep, shovel-working methodically, filling bucket after bucket. Each haul ascends on the rope, tips into a keg lined with waxed linen, and sloshes with the quiet glee of newfound fortune. Why risk this? Because beyond the city walls, farmers crave night earth, and alchemists whisper it can ripen lead into gold if only you boil away the mortal sin. In truth, it does something simpler. Spread across exhausted fields, human waste wakes the soil, fattening barley and peas far better than strained pig slurry. A full load can earn a thief more than a cobbler makes in a week. No tax, no questions, just quick coin by lantern light. The catch, of course, is everything. Infection, arrest, burial alive should the pit wall collapse, or a simple misstep into a pocket of methane that kills faster than any highwayman's blade. From street level, you might glimpse a telltale sign, a cart rolling at dawn, tar-soaked cloth draped over barrels that drip suspiciously onto the stones. Guards wave it through. They know the smell and have no stomach for haggling bribes before breakfast. By mid-morning, the cargo will be diluted in fields beyond the north gate, leaving the thieves to barter for bread, ale, perhaps a new pair of boots if last night's liquor didn't chew the soles off. They spend fast, live rough, and ride a strange tide of respect and revulsion, welcome in farmsteads, cursed in city taverns, half legend in both. Occasionally, success spoils them. A thief pushes his luck, drains a pit belonging to the wrong monastery, and wakes to find brothers of Saint Euphemia filing charges of sacrilege. Or worse, he boasts too loudly in the bathhouse, and next evening finds himself staring down the blunt end of a gong farmer's shovel. Professional courtesy enforced at knuckle point. Gong farmers may be untouchable, but their territory is law. Poach the wrong cesspit, and you invite a beating in a back alley that ends with your own body seasoning tomorrow's haul. Yet every crackdown breeds ingenuity. Thieves develop signals, chalk marks shaped like half-moons scraped on doorframes, to warn partners which pits are ripe, which are traps. They time their raids to storms when gutters roar and the smell disperses. Some even court households, slipping a coin to servants for whispered schedules of when the master's pit will overflow. Servants rarely refuse. A stinking floor means a flogging, and a paid thief is cheaper than hiring legit nightmen. Truth is, everyone crawls through compromise. The aldermen draft stern ordinances about unauthorized waste removal, then quietly accept lower death rates from typhoid when pits vanish overnight. Farmers pretend ignorance about provenance while counting heavier sheaves each harvest. Even physicians, those leather-masked prophets of bile and blister, secretly purchase digested humors for experimental poultices. Only the church remains officially scandalized, though rumor claims certain monks sponsor their own squads of soil collectors, funneling profits into candle wax and imported wine. God's work, after all, demands funding. Come afternoon, a gentle rain freshens the air and washes last night's sins down the gutters, but one thief lingers near the goldsmith's alley. He palms a dull coin, payment from a grateful tenant who awoke to find his privy mysteriously lightened. The thief flips it, catches it, stares a second too long. In that pause, a constable rounds the corner, nose wrinkling, gaze sharpening. Recognition flickers. The thief bolts. The chase clatters past spice stalls and weaving sheds. Townsfolk flatten against walls, cursing and laughing in equal measure. The constable's boots slip on a slick patch no one wants to identify, and the thief vanishes through a tanner's yard where the smell masks any human trail. By vespers, he's back at the riverside, trading sludge-stained hose for a crust of bread and a mug of black beer so sour it could strip lye. He laughs with the barmaid who refuses to touch his coins, raises the mug in toast to no one, and hulks into the shadows before the scent offends paying customers. Tomorrow he'll scout another quarter, tap another privy wall, listen to the city's bowels rumble like distant thunder promising both danger and deliverance. You, courteous citizen, will note the streets slightly less rank, the fields slightly greener, and perhaps wonder why bread costs a groat less this season. You'll thank the baker, bless the weather, curse the cows, but never guess your own night soil made the journey, and that somewhere beyond the walls, two thieves count profits in the dark, their hands forever stained by the filth everyone else flushes from memory. A single candle glows behind a shutter barely cracked, its flame trembling like a conspirator's heartbeat. You press your back to the damp brick, listening. Nothing but the river's slow cough, a barge chain rattling downstream, the far-off gossip of tavern doors. Good. You knock 3 times, knuckle, coin, knuckle. The slit widens, an eye peers out, and you smell boiled rue and rancid pork fat as the door unhooks. Inside, the dark is thick enough to bite. The room, if you can call 4 leaning walls a room, smells of cloves, blood, and something sour from a corner bucket that once held cider. A blanket has been nailed across a window to muffle any accidental screams. Near the hearth stands the healer, tall as a gallows post, hands wrapped in linen already spotted brown. He greets you by touch, not sight. Cataracts filmed his eyes years ago, so he lets fingers do the seeing, running over your coat, pausing at the bulge of the purse you brought as down payment on survival. He was once an apprentice barber, rumor says, before the bishop's men burned his shop for charging a priest half price on a tooth pull. Now he practices in the only hours left to him, those God forgets, and the church sleeps through. His lantern is shielded, the door barred. Outside, healing without license earns lashes. Inside, ignorance has sharper consequences. A miscut, a panicked gasp, a spasm when steel meets bone, and someone will bang on the constable's gate come morning, demanding a corpse cart. Your patient tonight lies on a plank balanced between two ale barrels, legs swaddled in rags dark with seepage. A carpenter's saw rests nearby, teeth glinting like a row of small, eager priests. The blind surgeon runs a finger along the blade's edge, nods, and whispers a prayer that sounds halfway between Latin and desperation. He turns to his helper, a girl no older than 13, whose cheeks bear pockmarks from last spring's sickness. She knows where every tool is kept because she cleaned them at dawn while roosters sang lies about hope. There will be no opium tonight. The stash went dry after a monk got smart and doubled prices. Instead, the girl presses a block of maple between the patient's teeth. "Bite like you hate the world," she says, voice flat as a river stone. Then she pours a draught of brandy across the wound, across the saw, across her own trembling wrists. The carpenter's lips blister with each swallow, but he nods, eyes wild, ready for oblivion to fail him. The healer hums. Someone once said it's the melody of a lullaby from the plague camps, but here it sounds closer to morning. He makes the first incision with a knife slim enough to slip between ribs. Hot blood sprays the candle and sputters, shadows dancing in surprise. The girl swabs fast, linen turning scarlet, her face unreadable, as if she's long ago replaced horror with arithmetic. One cut, 2 arteries, 3 quick clamps made of boiled willow. The surgeon's movements are sure, almost graceful. Blindness taught him economy. No hesitation, no wasted reach. Every slice remembered through muscle, like a prayer done by habit when faith died. You hold the lantern. Flame quivers like a saint doubting itself. Sweat crawls down your spine. Somewhere in the alley, a drunk recites half a psalm, and for a moment you fear the words will conjure a witness. But the prayer drifts off, swallowed by night. Inside, steel grinds on bone. The saw drones, rasping through shin as if carving winter firewood. A howl erupts, muffled by the maple block cracking in the patient's jaw. His eyes roll, pupils shrinking to pinheads of panic. You want to say something kind. Instead, you listen to the rhythm. Push, pull, push, until the limb finally parts with a wet sigh. The girl smears boiled tar across the stump, sealing flesh, silencing arteries that still twitch like startled worms. She sprinkles ground hemlock on top. Not enough to kill, just to sting the wound shut and scare off spirits that sniff around fresh meat. The healer ties a linen wrap tight, knots it with fingers that remember every tendon they've ever betrayed. Then he steps back and whispers, "Breathe," though it's unclear whether he means the patient or himself. Maybe all 3 of you? Payment follows custom, half coin, half silence. The purse clinks, the healer nods, and the girl tucks the coins into a clay jar buried beneath eel skins to dull their jangle. You help drag the unconscious man onto a straw pallet against the wall. He'll wake at dawn, screaming for futures that limped away in the night. They'll feed him poppy seed mash if they can afford it, or have him bite a leather strap until his throat forgets how to howl. The healer wipes his hands on the same linen he used to probe the wound, folds it carefully, and drops it into a pot of vinegar boiling on the hearth. The vinegar hisses, catching the scent of rosin and old fear. Cloth may come clean, memory never does. He reaches for a small brass crucifix nailed sideways above the door, left crooked on purpose, they say, so saints won't feel obliged to watch. He taps it twice, then blows out the candle. You step outside into pre-dawn chill. Mist curls along the gutters, hiding what's left of the blood you washed from the plank. Somewhere upriver, church bells are about to claim another righteous morning. You slip through alleyways, head down, rehearsing ignorance for anyone who asks why your boots stink of tar and brandy. Behind you, the shutter closes, sealing away a world where bones squeal, saints avert their gaze, and hope gets stitched together with tar and superstition, because that's cheaper than mercy. By noon, respectable folk will gossip about miracles. A carpenter who lost a leg yet lives, a blind sawbones nobody can name, maybe even a girl whose hands stay steady when grown men faint. The bishop will thunder about sorcery, constables will shrug, and the city will keep bleeding after sunset. But tonight, 3 strangers gambled against death and bought themselves a few more dawns. The price was simple: secrecy, pain, and 1 more Montague's worth of bone dust swept into the hearth, in a city that never truly sleeps, that passes for a bargain. You spot him at the edge of torch glare, a boy no taller than a grain sack, arm crooked around an iron rod topped with a sputtering rushlight. The flame swings with each shaky breath, tracing circles of gold on rain-varnished cobbles. You could mistake him for a stray cat, thin, quick, wary, except a cat wouldn't be rented by the hour. Tonight he's your lamp, your compass, your disposable miracle of cheap illumination. The gate guards call him Lantern Lad, Wick Brat, or simply Oi You. His real name is unimportant. He'll probably outgrow it before he outgrows the cough eating his ribs. Payment is a halfpenny, or a crust if coin feels extravagant. He pockets neither. The fee goes straight to the mistress of the orphan seller, who hires him out like a tool you expect to break. When dawn arrives, any boy returning with wick snuffed earns a beating. Any boy who doesn't return saves her the trouble. Economics pure enough to make a priest wretch, though priests rarely walk these streets after dark. You pass beneath a stone arch that drips last week's storm. The flame gutters. Instinctively, the boy cups the lantern with 1 scarred hand. You see old burns, shiny like wax, mapping every knuckle. A gust could still snuff the rush. A snuff means blindness. Blindness means thieves, ruts, or, worse, misstep into a cesspool disguised as puddle. He knows this calculus better than you know morning prayer. When the wind picks up, he turns his thin body to shield the light, sacrificing flesh to weather so your boots stay dry. How did he land here? Lose a father to the river's black maw, a mother to the pox, an apprenticeship to fees no one could pay. The orphan seller offered straw, salt soup, and purpose. Purpose arrives nightly when tavern bells spill merchants too drunk to remember which alley shortcuts also serve as open sewers. The boy waits by the door, skinny arm aloft like a human signpost. "Light your path, my lord?" He squeaks, voice cracking between childhood and something already older than sin. A nod, a fee, and he trots ahead, a flickering star just out of reach. Every dozen steps he glances back to be sure you're still upright, still breathing, still potential repeat business. Return customers mean tomorrow's bowl of oats, but excessive attention invites kicks. Nobody enjoys being reminded how fragile their dignity looks under a child's pity. So he perfects the art of half-looking, peripheral sympathy, never direct. If you stumble, he slows. Not enough to embarrass you, just enough to let drunken gravity find its balance before the next cobble slope. Danger multiplies where light thins. A corner smells of wine-slick vomit and old knuckle bones. Someone lost a dice game and maybe a kidney. The boy raises the lantern higher, stretching his ribs until you hear cartilage pop. The flame reveals 2 shapes slumped by a shuttered bakehouse. One shape groans, the other doesn't. Your heart jogs. The boy keeps walking. He's learned the trick. Don't break stride. Don't catch eyes. Don't invite another job. Corpse duty pays more, but costs parts you can't regrow. A sudden clatter, hooves, iron-rimmed wheel, a driver whipping through curfew like taxes don't apply to him. In panic, you freeze. The boy lunges, yanks your sleeve, drags you against a doorway just as the cart barrels past, showering sparks where rim bites stone. Your pulse drums in your ears. The boy looks up, expression unreadable in half-light, then shrugs as if saving lives is Tuesday. You nearly thank him, but remember gratitude sounds awkward, spoken down to someone a head shorter. You mutter a blessing instead. He blinks, unsure whether to pocket it or toss it with the gutter sludge. The route bends toward the river stairs, last gauntlet before home. Fog rolls off the water, dousing the lantern until it resembles a dying coal. Here the air tastes of fish guts and mildew. Here footpads lurk because echoes swallow screams. The boy blows gently across the rushlight, coaxing brighter bloom, and steps onto the first mossy stone. One slip and he'll vanish beneath black water, flame snuffed, name forgotten. You plant a hand on his shoulder, steady, small, bird-boned, and feel him flinch, uncertain whether the gesture means thanks or threat. You ease your grip. He resumes descent, each step a whispered dare to gravity. At the bottom, your own door looms, a warped slab of oak behind which a bed and a locked coffer wait. You fumble the latch, then remember protocol. From your purse a coin appears, dull from too many palms. You press it into his fingers. They're colder than the fog. He eyes the metal, weighs it against the night's bruises, and nods once. Transaction concluded. No bow, no flourish. He turns, already seeking another shadow to escort, another beating heart to rent warmth from his waning flame. You watch him ascend, lantern bouncing like a will-o'-the-wisp swallowed by mist. For a moment, the river's hush feels heavier, as if the city itself sighs, knowing the odds stacked against a boy built of smoke and scorch marks. He'll grow taller if disease spares him, but lungs half-cured by alley fumes rarely wait for birthdays. Perhaps next year he'll light streets in some richer quarter, carrying real oil behind horn panes. Perhaps next week he'll slip on frost, rushlight drowning in the gutter's icy trickle. Either way, dawn will paint the city honest, merchants will haggle, monks will chant, and someone will buy bread without tasting ash. Few will wonder who kept the darkness at bay for the price of second-hand copper. Inside, you bolt the door, peel off damp cloak, and sit by hearth that leaps alive at a single spark. Comfort blooms, too quick, too bright, and shame rides its heels. Your toes thaw while his keep walking. You tell yourself you paid fairly. You tell yourself he chose this. You tell yourself the orphan cellar at least gives him soup. Lies are simpler in warm rooms. Somewhere beyond the square, a fresh rattle of hooves and shouted curses. Another client stumbling into night. Another small spine straightening under the weight of an iron rod and a flame one sneeze from extinction. The city does not sleep. It simply spends lives like coins, making change with bones and sighs. And lantern boys, thin as candle wicks, burn themselves shorter so the rest of us don't trip over our own comfort. Bread begins long before the sunrise claims any credit. It starts in a room no larger than a stable stall, where the air hangs heavy with damp flour and the ghost of yesterday's yeast. You slip through the side door while most of the city is still practicing the art of unconscious prayer, and you feel the temperature jump a decade. 3 iron ovens squat against the wall like sleeping black bears, their bellies already growling with ember light. The baker is there, of course. He never really leaves, his apron crusted with a geological record of dough from nights past. He greets you with a nod the way a gravedigger might acknowledge another shovel in the ground. Professional courtesy, nothing warm about it. Warmth is for the bread. He works by lantern, wick trimmed short, because too much flame ruins your night vision. You need to see the dough breathe. A trough of water stands ready, clouded with bran and the reflection of a man who hasn't heard a bird sing in a decade. He measures flour using hands that have forgotten how to unclench, scooping clouds into the bowl that could drown a small child. Salt he sprinkles like bad confetti. Then, the secret ingredient, a ladle of yesterday's starter, alive with bubbles that pop like muffled applause. You realize he's smiling. Bakers sometimes do when the ferment speaks, but it's a smile as brief as a candle's wink. The kneading begins, and all softness folds back into muscle. Outside, some fool might believe bread is a sunrise miracle. That fool has never watched a baker sweat at 250 in the deepest blue of night. kneading until wrists burn, folding until the dough resists, submitting only when gluten tightens like a drum. He mutters to himself, not prayers, but small oaths to Saint Honoré, patron of bread, dough, and occasionally despair. For every loaf that rises, two once fell flat, wasting wood, wasting time, two things more precious than flour. He drags the lump onto a board, dusted just enough to keep from sticking, but not so much that the crust goes dull. Then he repeats, again, again. By the third batch, his shoulders creak, flour clings to eyebrows, and you could trace rivers of sweat through the powder on his skin. Across the lane, the butcher begins his own concerto, and though walls separate you, sound travels through stone like gossip. First a cleaver's thud, meaty and final. Then the rasp of saw on joint, brittle as frost-splitting tile. He sings under his breath, no tune you recognize, more a low chant to keep time with the blade. When the baker opens a shutter to release steam, night air drifts in carrying that unmistakable perfume, raw iron and salt, the smell that tells every creature it still has blood to lose. Your stomach folds in on itself, but the baker barely notices. He's married to that scent, the necessary evil that means breakfast will include bacon. There's a contract, ancient and unspoken, between the two trades. The butcher finishes his slaughter before dawn, so the streets can be scrubbed before wives arrive with baskets and gentle stomachs. The baker finishes baking before dawn, so the bread can cool beside carcasses still steaming, proving there's a softness left in the world. Each man depends on the other's secrecy. No one wants to picture flour drifting onto still-warm offal or bone dust settling on dough, yet the air doesn't respect property lines. Sometimes you wonder if the sweetness in a loaf is just a ghost of iron from across the lane. Inside the butcher's shop, fat sizzles on the hearth where he renders tallow for candles and future profit. He lifts a lamb carcass, cheeks puffing, back arguing, and hooks it so the ribs form a cathedral arch. A cat prowls beneath, eyes green as tarnished copper, licking lips each time sinew snaps. The butcher chuckles, flicks a scrap into the dark, and the cat vanishes with a sound you wish your ears could forget. The rest of the scraps will go to the tanner, or, if business is slow, the rat catcher who breeds a special variety of plague fodder for noble laboratories. Nothing is wasted, not in a city that nightly threatens famine. The baker's loaves finally proof in a wooden cabinet that smells of cedar and wet dreams. He slides one finger into the dough, tilting his head to judge rebound. Satisfied, he lifts the board and marches to the oven mouth. Flames leer like stage actors waiting for cues. With a practiced jerk, he flips the loaves inside, seals the iron door, and leans back with a sigh that sounds like a man setting down a coffin and realizing there's another behind him. He has 40 minutes to breathe, which means 40 minutes to portion tomorrow's flour, sharpen the lame, and perhaps steal a sip of watered wine. Rest is for men who trust daylight. A knock at the shutter. You stiffen. Curfew stands until the bell of prime. But the baker knows that knock. He cracks the window and passes out 2 small rolls nearly too hot to hold. A hand, slender, ringed, definitely above this neighborhood's pay grade, presses a coin into his palm. The city's alderman prefers bread that still sweats steam, served with slices of dawn-killed ham his wife pretends not to see. If the law asks, nothing happened. If the law insists, remember flour produces more dust than truth, and witnesses choke on both. Dawn finally nibbles the horizon, spires blushing like guilty lovers at the first touch of light. The butcher hoses blood from the gutter with bucket after bucket of river water that probably hosted last night's corpses. The baker stacks cooling racks near the doorway, steam rolling up to join the morning mist. Market wives will arrive within the hour, cooing over crusts, tutting at prices, never guessing how close their breakfast came to wearing a cleaver's kiss or a rat's whisker. You step outside, shoes dusted white, nostrils coated in bread and butchered innocence, and you understand why ghosts linger here. Night gave them shape, but dawn pretends they were never invited. The baker wipes his forehead, smears a stripe of clay-colored sweat above his brow, and stares at you as if seeing your bones beneath skin, weighing them the way he weighs flour. He nods once, a farewell, a warning, maybe gratitude for sharing silence, and turns back to mix the preferment that will haunt tomorrow's loaves. You walk on, chewing a heel he pressed into your hand as toll for company. It tastes of smoke, salt, and something else you refuse to name, crunchy where stray grain meets hint of grit. It tastes, in other words, exactly like a city that forces food and ghosts to share the same oven. Night drapes itself in wet canvas, trapping the city's heat and holding it close like a fever. You taste soot in every breath, a reminder that half the roofs still burn last winter's firewood because the forest no longer stretches far enough to hide the axe. Down at gutter level, however, the streets are alive, skittering, squeaking, brazen. Rats. They own the hour between the butcher's sweep and the baker's yawn, darting across cobbles slick with fish heads, weaving under milk carts that groan toward the dawn market. Most citizens curse them, throw stones, mutter prayers to saints who never studied epidemiology. But a few men, sharp as rusty nails and twice as crooked, call the rats by gentler names: income, insurance, future. You meet one in an alley behind the dye maker's vats, where the brick sweats violet tears and the air smells of crushed snails and old vinegar. He leans against a crate, boot tapping a lazy rhythm that only rodents understand. A burlap sack lies at his feet, twitching as though it dreams of open fields. When he sees you, he lifts a tin whistle to cracked lips and teases out 3 notes, low, deliberate. The sack settles, rat catcher's lullaby. He winks, spits something dark, and gestures for you to follow. He doesn't bother with torches. His eyes have learned the alleys by feel, memorized every stagnant puddle, every broken barrel that funnels vermin like a shepherd's crook. A half-moon glints off the iron tines of the trap hanging from his belt, rows of spring jaws filed to an intimacy with bone. The tool wasn't forged by any guild. He built it himself from scrap and spite, swearing each tooth into service with a blacksmith's oath. Better to chew sin than starve. He stops at a cellar door so warped it looks arthritic. 2 quick knocks, fist, palm. A latch lifts. You duck inside and discover a dim world lit by an oil lamp wedged into a human skull, wax hardened where brains once pulsed. The room seethes. Rats crowd wooden cages stacked to the rafters, dozens deep, fur rippling like dirty silk. Some squeal, some gnaw, some simply stare, with eyes too bright to be innocent. The catchers move among them like priests at vespers, whispering, counting, stroking whiskers to judge health. Sick rats earn a quick twist of the neck and drop into a bucket that will end up in someone's stew. Cat, dog, desperate beggar. Healthy ones get water laced with vinegar to keep the fleas docile but alive. Fleas are half the profit. Because there's a market for plague. Nobody calls it that, not openly, but city fathers pay bounties for every rat tail a catcher turns in. Proof of control, they claim. Public safety. Yet the tales keep coming because the rat men learned a secret. Kill them all at once and you end your own livelihood. Better to harvest, breed, release. A balance. A pact. You feed the plague just enough to starve tomorrow. One catcher, gaunt as a candlewick, lifts a fat male by the scruff. Breeder, he grunts, slides it into a separate crate lined with straw, the kind stolen from stables where horses now sleep on bare boards. Another man sprinkles oats mixed with crushed garlic, makes the fur glossy, easier to skin if tanners get desperate for lining small purses. Nothing goes to waste. Pelts for glove makers too poor for lambskin, tails for the magistrate's tally, bones ground into powder rumored to cure impotence. Even the fleas have purpose. Alchemists bottle them in spirits, claiming a dram wards off melancholia if swallowed during a thunderstorm. They invite you to witness tonight's release, a ritual cloaked in necessity and greed. You hike to the city wall where moonlight bleeds through crenels. Below, a refuse heap steams like a dragon's midden. Cabbage leaves, Fish guts, rags soaked in something unmentionable. Ideal habitat. The catcher frees a dozen rats. They flow out of the sack in a gray tide, vanish into shadows before your brain shapes second thoughts. He scratches a mark on a piece of horn, inventory for next week's collection, then tosses you a tail as souvenir. It hits your palm, warm, slightly slick, lighter than guilt. You drop it before thought finishes. On the walk back, he explains the arithmetic. Too many rats, and the bishop's guards start pyres, burning streets edge to edge, fumigating every cellar with pitch smoke that kills humans quicker than fleas. Too few rats and the bounties dry up. Aldermen declare victory. Citizens forget fear. The rat catcher eats dust. So they maintain a population like a vintner tends vines, prune, feed, cull, but never destroy. If a noble wants proof his manor is safe, the rat catcher sells him traps already loaded with half-dazed vermin. If an enemy needs humbling, a burlap sack loosens near the granary. Grain spoils, prices climb, and somewhere a catcher's purse fattens by the weight of someone else's hunger. Some call them traitors, plague-mongers, devils in boots. Yet when the Black Death last licked the city's throat, healers found that streets patrolled by rat catchers suffered fewer corpses. Constant culling broke transmission chains, starved fleas of fresh hosts, slowed despair to a manageable drizzle. The catchers remember that year with odd fondness. Coin fell like autumn plums, and even the mayor shook their hands, through linen, of course. Now the mayor refuses eye contact, but the treasury still signs the bounties. Hypocrisy spends the same as gratitude. Dawn peels back the eastern sky. The rat catcher's whistle lilts once more, tender as a lullaby for monsters. Back in the cellar, he cracks a crust of bread, shares a chunk with his favorite albino specimen. Good luck charm, he says, worth 10 normal rats in superstition alone. You bite your own piece, surprised it tastes merely stale, not contaminated by the moral rot swirling around it. He pours beer that smells of damp straw and iron nails, raises the mug. To balance, he toasts. You drink, unsure whether you just bought yourself protection or damnation. When you step into daylight, pigeons scatter, offended by the scent clinging to your cloak. You pass vendors setting stalls, children chasing hoops, clergy rehearsing hymns that promise salvation from every pest, except the one gnawing beneath their feet. None of them notice a wiry man slipping down a drain with a cage of new recruits. They will notice perhaps when bread doubles in price after grain stores mysteriously spoil, or when the apothecary sells out of flea-bite salves by noon. By then the rat catcher will be negotiating next week's bounty, one pocket jangling with tails, the other releasing life back into the gutters. For balance, always for balance. You roll your shoulders, trying to shrug off the feeling that the ground itself is breathing. A squeak echoes from somewhere under the planks of a produce cart. The merchant stamps a foot, curses the devil, keeps unloading cabbages. The city hums, ignorant by design. Above, church bells call the faithful. Below, whiskers twitch at the sound, wondering which will come first. The hymn's amen, or tonight's whistle summoning them home. The door shuts, and laughter collapses like a stage prop kicked off cue. Perfume that smelled seductive 5 minutes ago now clings to the air like spoiled fruit. Bed ropes creak a final sigh. The mattress exhales secrets through straw punctured by years of restless hips. Footsteps recede, boots if the client paid full price, bare heels if he didn't, and the corridor swallows them into candlelit anonymity. Behind, in the dim afterglow, remains a battlefield of linens, sweat, and things polite throats refuse to name. Enter the cleaner, broom in one hand, bowl of gray lye in the other, eyes already half closed against the stinging musk that coats every square inch of this room. She moves as quietly as guilt, tucking a kerchief around her mouth so only her eyebrows show emotion. Those brows arch, resigned, at the bouquet awaiting her. Cheap wine belch, damp wool, blood where teeth forgot restraint, a teardrop of something sweeter that will sour by dawn. She has 10 minutes before the next couple staggers in, buzzing on cider and the delusion that candles hide cellulite and conscience alike. 10 minutes to erase evidence no one wants to acknowledge exists. First, the linens. She yanks the sheet, flicks it like a fisherman casting rot, and the straw ticks underneath tremble with whatever crawls there after midnight. Spots bloom violet, rust, cream, an accidental fresco of lust. She locates the worst stain, rubs it with a paste of wood ash and spit, then plunges the fabric into a bucket whose water has turned the color of regrets. No rinse, no soap, only swirl until the memory blurs enough to pass inspection in half-light. She will carry that bucket down the back stairs later, dumping it into a gutter already fluent in the vocabulary of brothels. A louder task comes next, the chamber pot. Clients pay extra for exclusion from street latrines. The pot, therefore, bears witness to secrets both digestive and moral. She tips its lukewarm slurry into the same bucket, because economies of filth demand efficiency, then sluices a splash of vinegar over the rim. The steam kisses her cheeks. She does not flinch. Vinegar is mercy-masking as acid. On the dresser sits a solitary coin, a gratuity too tarnished for the madam's books. She pockets it without thought, a tax on silence. Around it are 2 wine cups, one cracked, both smeared with lipstick the color of bruised mulberries. She wipes each with the corner of her apron, turning the cloth inside out so the stain folds inward, hidden like the lie of romance the house sells by the quarter hour. The mattress last. She kneels, arm deep in straw, fishing out unmentionables. A ribbon, a button, a broken charm shaped like St. Margaret warding off childbirth. That trinket will go back to the girl who dropped it. A tiny shield in a war whose ceasefires are negotiated nightly with cheap candles and painted smiles. She pats the straw flat, realigns the wool blanket, and sprinkles a pinch of crushed lavender husks between layers. The lavender doesn't win. It merely muddies the ledger of odors until no single sin stands out. Across the hallway, the next room groans. A whimper, a slap, muffled negotiation. Business never stalls, only relocates. She works faster now, fingers raw where lie has chewed nails to half moons. Speed is safety, and a clean sheet is as much armor as any knight's mail. She glances at the mirror, small, warped, stolen from a merchant's vanity. It reflects a face that could be 17, could be 40. The steam and candle blight never agree. Whatever age, the eyes are seasoned oak, rings upon rings recording every evening's harvest. Someone knocks, 2 short, 1 long. The signal that a fresh pair climbs the stairs. She snaps the clean sheet tight, tucks corners military fast, swipes a rag across the floorboards to gather stray hairs gleaming in lamplight like silver worms. Into her apron the rag disappears. She will boil it later with alum until it resembles threadbare parchment. Door opens. A woman enters first, rouge still wet, forcing cheer into dimples that ache from repetition. Behind her, a merchant adjusts his belt, eyes darting anywhere but the cleaner. Client and courtesan slip past. The cleaner vanishes out another door, carrying her bucket as if it were a royal chalice. She descends a spiral stair cut from stone so old it remembers pagan prayers. In the basement wait 2 more cleaners, wringing sheets, gossiping in whispers about a patron who requested candle wax and psalm verses in the same breath. The new bucket empties into a trough that seeps through cracks into the soil beneath, feeding a halo of weeds no gardener can tame. Above, laughter starts again, high, brittle, razor-edged. The cleaner wipes her palms on her skirt, straightens the kerchief, and climbs. Outside, dawn glows faintly over rooftop tiles slick with dew and pigeon dung. Soon church bells will declare morning innocence. They will toll above a city still wet with night's collective sweat, insistent that holiness begins at sunrise. She reaches the landing just as a door bursts open. The same merchant stumbles out, flushed, coat askew. He nearly collides with her bucket, curses, then remembers courtesy, flips a copper into the slop as penance. It hisses and disappears. He flees. Inside, the courtesan lies across the bed, hair uncoiling like spilled ink, face turned to the wall. She is breathing, but something in the room feels freshly broken. The cleaner steps forward, gentle now, pulling the blanket up to the woman's shoulders, brushing a strand from a cheek that gleams with unspilled tears. No words, only the soft ritual of tucking sorrow where no auditor will look. When she closes the door, her footsteps sound heavier than the bucket she carries. On the stairs she pauses, flexes fingers etched with burn scars and lie cracks, and forces a breath deep enough to scrape the bottom of her lungs. Work waits in the next room, and the next, until sunrise erases evidence too stubborn for vinegar. Only then will she stumble to her own cot in the attic, curl around hands that smell of lavender, blood, and cheap wine, and dream of clear water that never needs changing. But tomorrow night, long after curfew bells scold the streets blank, she'll lift her bucket once more, walk through doors still pulsing with someone else's pleasure, and start erasing everything the city pretends never happened. The sheets will hiss, the straw will bite, and the mirror will keep secrets better than any priest. In a city built on barter, her trade is cleanliness leased by the hour and paid in silence. And every silence, however brief, buys the brothel one more breath before daylight dares to call itself pure. The night is thinning, but it isn't near dead, just restless, like a dog that knows its master will kick it awake before breakfast. You hear the first scrape of iron on stone long before you see him, the bellman, trudging down the lane with a cow clapper the size of his forearm. He stops at each door, raises the clang to shoulder height, and lets it swing exactly once. The strike is dull, heavy, a sound designed to vibrate through timber and bone without waking anyone who paid to remain ignorant. Sleep too deeply, you pay a fine. Answer too slowly, you pay with lost work. Either way, coin coughs out of pockets and into a pouch that jingles just loudly enough to drown out conscience. Behind him pads a second figure, barefoot, carrying a sack of kindling that clacks like dice in a cheating cup. The fire starter. She was taught never to ring the bell, one job, one noise, but she times her footsteps so close behind his that the rhythm becomes a duet. Clang pad, like a forge deciding which metal to ruin next. When the bellman finishes a street, she slips through whatever door opens, drops 2 splinters of fat-soaked pine onto last night's gray ashes, blows a single breath, and births the day in sparks. 8 houses, 15 sparks, 3 blisters on her lip. That's the arithmetic of dawn. Their partnership is unofficial, profitable, and fragile. The bellman hates lighting fires because crouching makes his knees scream. The fire starter hates clanging because it announces her presence to men who assume every woman with a key to their door must also carry a key to her virtue. So they split the chores and, unofficially, split the bribes. 2 coppers from the baker who must reach the oven by sext. 1 hot roll from the miller's widow who can't risk chimney smoke giving away her stash of untaxed grain. A half dipper of watery ale from the inn that doubles as a gambler's chapel. It adds up to survival, if not comfort. They are pillars of what the aldermen call the whisper economy. Trades conducted at volumes polite society pretends not to hear. A knock too soft for a guard but heavy with intention. A hissed password beneath a windowsill. A rumor traded for a heel of bread. In daylight, money clinks loudly. In darkness, value travels on breath and the nervous shuffle of feet. Everyone participates. The priest who rents his torch to smugglers. The maid who sells the Lord's dinner scraps to the pig farmer. Even the constable, who looks the other way when his own wife hires the bellman to rouse her brother for illicit early bird hunting. The city's true market never closes. It merely lowers its voice. Tonight, the bellman has been nursing a private grudge. The chandler on Fish Street shorted him a penny last week, muttering about hard times. Hard times belong to everyone, so revenge comes cheap. As he nears the chandler's shutter, he raises the bell, but instead of 1 measured strike, he hammers the clapper thrice, hard enough to rattle loose mortar from the archway. A candle slips inside, fractures, falls, wax splotch on the sill that will cool by dawn. The chandler jolts awake, curses streaming, and barrels onto the street wearing nothing but wool socks and alarm. Across the lane, shutters fly open, faces raw with sleep, eyes narrowed into daggers of suspicion. No one has sympathy for a man who skimps wages. Everyone delights in watching him scramble for his own dignity in the gutter. While attention fixates on the chandler, the fire starter slips into the vintner's shop, a place thick with oak fumes and unwashed promises. She's been promised an extra coin if she can coax the kiln alive before matins. Last night the vintner's apprentice let the embers die, a sin equal parts indolence and thirst. She leans close, letting the heat kiss her eyelashes as she thrusts a twist of straw into a crevice glowing faintly like a buried ember of gossip. One puff, two, a spark leaps, wood catches, and a newborn flame arcs up the flue. Comfort and danger share a bed. She beds them nightly. Her name isn't worth engraving, but it shows up in two different ledgers. In the brewer's books as chargirl, paid in mugs and crusts. In the cathedral's sin roll as arsenatrix, a term applied to anyone whose spark ever wandered where wood misbehaved. Years ago, a roof went up because she forgot to latch the stove door behind her. She escaped blame only because the miller's eldest son confessed. Everyone knew he'd do anything for her smile. The miller paid the fine, the son paid with scars, and she paid with insomnia that never quiets no matter how many dawns she conjures. Back outside, the bellman has resumed his standard tempo, but cannot resist small cruelties. A sharper clang where debt is owed, a softer one where last week's widow still weeps. In theory, city ordinance requires him to announce the hour, past 4 and all's well, but his throat is too ash-coated for civic optimism. He croaks something closer to, "Lord, let the roof beams hold," which most sleepers interpret as a dream or a dog's growl. His staff clacks the flagstone, leaving wet half-moons that tomorrow's tax clerk will puzzle over while hurrying to the chancery. Evidence evaporates quickly in a town that thrives on plausible deniability. Every scorch mark tells two stories, the official one written in fine leather accounts, and the whispered sequel traded for favors behind smoke-blackened doorframes. They reach the final street, Guild Row, where each doorway bristles with crests and pride. Rules say the bellman mustn't ring here. Guild masters hire private knocker-up boys armed with pea-shooters aimed at shutter hinges. But he allows himself one gentle tap on the brass of the cobbler's hall, just enough to unsettle the sleeping officers who fined him last month for drinking on duty. Then he turns his bell sideways, lips the rim like a chalice, and exhales warmth into cold metal. Steam ghosts up, vanishing quick, as if the night itself swallows confession. The fire starter finishes at a baker's side door, leaving a pyramid of kindling so neat it might pass for cathedral geometry. She straightens, flexes spine, and feels the dawn crawl under her fingernails, pink and persistent. Payment here is not coin, but heat. She stands over the oven's mouth, palms pressed to brick, sipping warmth like broth. The baker says nothing, he just nods, grateful she saved an hour of work. In the exchange of subtle economies, nods are worth more than pence. Nods owe favors. When they finally cross paths again, she in the middle of the lane, he under a sign creaking with dew, they trade spoils. 2 crusts, a bent token for ale, half a rind of cheese, and the satisfaction of small chaos wrought upon the chandler. No words, only the rustle of bags changing hands, and the quiet click of whetstone, as the bellman sharpens a burr from his clapper. Tomorrow's knocks must ring true, or no one will pay. You retreat into a doorway, watching them melt into gray twilight. Somewhere a rooster coughs out his first brag, merchants unlatch shutters, and the city pretends the morning sprang from nowhere, clean as a psalm. Yet you know better. Dawn was hammered, blown, and bartered into being by clangs and sparks and whispers too soft for daylight honor. A single ember rides a breeze above the rooftops, tiny, bright, defiant. If it lands wrong, someone's ceiling will glow like sunrise come early, and the bellman will murmur, "All's well," over the crackle, because saying so is cheaper than truth. The bells have struck their last lie of the night, yet the hush that follows feels anything but holy. It is the moment just before dawn, when even the rats pause, when torches sputter down to embers, when every alley holds its breath, as if the dark itself wonders whether it is safe to let go. You stand in the center of it all, soles sticky with bakery crumbs, straw, wax drips, something that might be blood, something that is definitely ash, and you realize the city isn't resting. It is merely changing masks. Behind shuttered windows, 100 bodies twitch over straw mattresses they didn't beat clean, whispering prayers they only half believe, drifting toward dreams laced with vinegar and wood smoke. Beneath those same floorboards, night soil thins as thieves siphon it into profit. Farther down, the mortar sweats, the earth still warm where a corpse cart paused long enough to leave shapes too human to be shadows. Even silence here has an odor, a bouquet brewed from fear, hunger, and the damp wool of people who can't afford to be monumental. And yet the engines of dawn are already humming. Somewhere a baker checks the rise on tomorrow's dough, running a finger over its skin with the tenderness of a father testing a fever. A rat catcher counts tails into neat piles, pleased because balance, at least for tonight, has been restored. The brothel cleaner wrings her rag one final time and watches the water turn a soft, impossible pink before it spirals down a crack and out of history. The lantern boy blows out his rushlight, kisses the blackened stem, and lies down in a corner of the orphan cellar, face glowing with the pride of having guided strangers home for the price of a crust he can't yet taste. You are tempted to let the image of them fade, as the daylight will certainly try to do, because it is easier to live among miracles when you never meet the hands that carve them. But dawn is a bad liar. It gilds the gutters and the gallows with the same light, exposing stains that scrubbing never quite erases. You remember the gong farmer shoulder deep in ordure, the corpse hauler stealing a ring off a stiff finger, the blind surgeon humming as bones sang beneath his saw. You remember that each foul detail kept the city alive long enough for a child to learn his letters, for a widow to sell cloth at market, for hymns to ignite under cathedral vaults. Survival is never sterile. Now birds begin their rowdy covenant with the sun, and rooftops echo with 1,000 small hunger calls. Market tents snap open like moth wings. A merchant splashes yesterday's wine onto a doorstep to drown the last of the fleas. A constable scolds his own reflection in a polished helm, vowing that today he will collect every fine. Even as the rituals of daytime posture for respectability, you catch the aftertaste of night on their breath. It lingers in the butcher's apron, in the baker's blistered palms, in the tremor that flickers across the bellman's knuckles when someone whacks a door too loudly. The lesson is suddenly obvious. Comfort is rented, not owned, and the rent is paid every dusk in sweat, filth, and small sacrifices no chronicle bothers to ink. The city's beauty, its archways, its midnight chants, its bread that pretends not to taste of fear, stands on the bones of people who work where torches don't go. People who nobody wants to know until the moment their absence turns the street into a grave. Civilization is a polite fiction financed by invisible shoulders. You feel the weight of it now, balanced on the rim of morning like a jug too full to carry far. Something warm nudges your boot. A cat pads by, fur dusted with flour and soot, proof that borders between trades dissolve when hunger draws the map. It stops, looks up with eyes the color of church bronze, and mews as if to say, "You can keep walking, but you will carry the smell with you." The cat is right. You will. Because night has pocketed part of you, a piece scented with vinegar, pine pitch, cheap perfume, and the faint copper tang of sawed bone. The east sky bruises from purple to pearl. Sunlight creeps down stone facades, stroking gargoyles that have witnessed every plague, riot, sermon, and sin this city can muster. You half expect the bodies of night workers to vanish like stagehands, but instead they linger at the threshold of alleys, wiping blades, twisting coins, trading yawns for curses. They squint at the light, then melt into doorways, not gone, merely off stage until the curtain of darkness calls them back. Their footprints shine wet on the cobbles a moment longer, then fade as if the earth is embarrassed to admit how recently it was fed. One final image insists on staying, a bell clapper wrapped for daytime silence, tucked beneath the bellman's cloak. He will unmuffle it tonight, rehearse the hour, perhaps add a flourish of mercy where vengeance rang yesterday. Mercy and vengeance, you realize, are just different swing arcs of the same iron tongue. Everything depends on who gets to sleep and who has to ring. So you inhale, deep, deliberate, knowing full well the air carries rumors of sewage, blood, and secrets washed only as far as the river's patience. You exhale something that feels suspiciously like gratitude. The city exhales with you. Boards creaking, pigeons launching, market bells chiming their metallic approval. Life resumes its performance, but you, having seen the rehearsal in all its viscera, clap softer than the rest. And tonight, when curfew bells peel the daylight off the rooftops and the dark shuffles back on stage, you'll hear the rattle and the saw and the whisper of straw under tired bodies. And instead of flinching, you'll nod like a conspirator. You'll remember the unseen gears still grinding, scraping, saving everyone who can afford oblivion. You might even spare a silent toast to hands that will never be clean, to lungs that cough smoke so you can breathe candle-sweet dreams. Because a city never truly sleeps. It only asks others to stay awake. And the least you can do, nestled in your linen sheets, is whisper thank you to the stranger ankle-deep in darkness, hauling dawn toward you one foul, indispensable task at a time.